Greetings from India. So here is another tutorial on collapsible sections and toggle sections. And in order to explain how collapsible sections and toggles differ, I am going to build a small form to capture information for a job application for a developer. So this form requires a name, contact number, contact email, an optional list of spoken languages, coding languages that the applicant is fluent in, whether the applicant has got any education, any degrees, certification, workshops, along with dates when these were obtained in a text area. And finally, a little section on the preferred coding platform, whether it's Windows or Linux with a radio button, and the coding tools that this person prefers to use on that platform. Right? So this is quite a short form for an application form. Potentially, application forms can be much longer. And when a form starts to become quite long, to the extent that you have to scroll down to fill in sections and stuff like this, potentially it becomes more difficult to visualize the entire form, to visualize how long it is. So there is a way to break down a form using collapsible sections. And in order to do this, I'm going to start again a new form, but let me add it into a new tab, because I'm going to refer back to this form and copy some of these fields. And now I'm going to add a couple of sections. Here in this first section, I'm simply going to replace this single column, which is a full width column, with this 3-column row here that I have. And so to do this, I need to come and see here. You see that this is the first row, and these 3 columns are the ones that I want to copy. So I'm simply going to copy and paste and replace this column here with this code. So now if I come back, here are my 3 fields that have been inserted for me. And as you can see from the original form, the next section is about spoken languages and coding languages, right? So let's say that I wanted to have a section called languages and coding, where I have these 2 fields within this. So what I would do here is I would start off by making this row into a grid, a subgrid. And I'm going to make this row now collapsible. And I'm going to give this a title, languages and coding. Okay, but I'm not going to toggle it for now. For now, I'm just going to concentrate on collapsible sections to illustrate the difference between the two. Now, and then what I want to do is I want to replace this column. So I go to my HTML section, which is here. You see this column here. I want to replace this column with this 2 columns here. So again, I go to my HTML section, and I'm going to copy these 2 columns here. Paste in here, go back to a grid, and there we go. Now I have the 2 text areas that have been inserted within this section. Good. And you see the code mirror editor automatically indented the HTML for me, so I don't have to bother about this. Next, I'm going to have, after this, we have a section called education. So let's break that down as well. And remember, I mean, this is a simple form, but of course what we could potentially be having is a section called education, where you have a lot more to put in. Maybe you have to put in the degrees at undergraduate level, maybe a master's degree, maybe even a PhD level, and you would maybe have different sections being filled in regarding this. So here again, I'm going to make this into a grid. We're going to make this a collapsible row, and I'm going to replace this column with the education column down here. Okay. There we go. And now we have the education here. Let's add another row. Make this into a grid. What else is there? Let's see what else we have. We have education, preferred platform. So let's put these two rows into the next section. So here we are. We want therefore to create a new row, which we're going to convert into a grid. Okay, we're going to make this collapsible, and now we want to replace this single row with the two rows that we have prior to this. Now what we want to do, if you look at the code, the HTML coding here, we don't want just this single column like we did before. Why is this not copying? Because it's highlighted, that's why. Now we don't want to just copy this column and insert it there. We actually want to have this entire double container section. So this is the first container and this is the second container. So we're going to copy these two containers. So the container contains the row as well as the column. And here, where we want to replace it is this container here, which contains basically the inner container, which contains our row. Let's see if that works. And there we go. That seems to be working fine. So we have the two rows being filled in within this outer row here. And here we're going to call this preferred platform. And this is education. Right. And finally, we need one more, which is our submit button. So we can simply copy the last container at the bottom of our code in order to have our submit button. There we go. Now let's update this. And I need to build a new page for this. So let's go back to contact forms. This is with sections. I need to copy this shortcode, create a new page, add a new page. Application form with sections. Get a shortcode. And let's publish this. Okay, now let's go. I need to add this to a menu. Appearance, menus, application form with sections, add to menu, and here we're going to put it as a sub-menu of this application form page. Let's save this, reload this page. And now in the menu, I have a sub-menu application form with section. So here's the form now, and you can see that the form is a lot more compact than previously, where the sections really allow you to separate sections of the sections of the form that might take up normally a lot more space if they were fully extended. And should I submit this form with some of the sections not filled with required fields? So let me put let's say French and Java, education. Let's put physics degree. Okay, and let's say that the last section I was to forget to submit, and I tried to submit it. What would happen is that it would automatically complain and say that this field is required. It would not allow me to submit because it is a required field. Collapsible sections are useful to break down a form into something that is much more manageable on the front end for your users. But it nonetheless requires them to fill in every single required field within each of the sections. And should they submit the form without filling in one of these, and the plugin would actually return an error message. So this was about collapsible sections within your form. But you would have noticed in the dashboard that when you set up a sections as a row as collapsible, you have the option to have it toggled. So what happens if we now convert these collapsible sections into toggled sections? Let's see what happens now if I update the form. So I now reload the form. Collapsed sections which have been converted to toggles are now appearing exactly as they were before, except that they have this additional little toggle button that allows you to toggle a section on and off, and thereby actually converting the title of a section into an actual question. What do you speak? Yes or no? Well, it should be more, do you speak a language, rather than what do you speak? But potentially these text labels are customizable in the HTML editor, and we will cover this a little further on in the video. But now let's say then that I speak French, that I code in Java, and I've got to put these details here, otherwise it'll complain. And now let's say that I want to submit my form without actually filling any of these subsequent sections. The form actually allows you to submit this, and the reason why this is happening is because any fields which are within a collapsed section, toggle section, regardless of whether they are required or not, when the toggle is off, when the section is untoggled, those fields are automatically disabled and are not being submitted into the backend. The plugin then figures out which are these fields which have not been submitted within untoggled sections and therefore skips validations for those fields. And that's the major difference between collapsible sections and toggle sections. So toggle sections basically become some kind of optional sections to fill into a form. So now, for example, if I was to again try and submit this form and fill in these fields and decide that I want to fill in this section about my education, but do not actually fill in this required field and try to submit it, now the form actually complains that this field is required. So toggle sections can be quite a powerful tool to try and add more diversity in the way you construct your forms and make certain fields optional. Now, there is another aspect of toggle sections which can be also quite powerful, and that is to group toggles together, sections of toggle sections together. So to do this, I'm going to actually convert this form here slightly, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add two more toggle sections, and I'm going to delete this row here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, what platform do you use? Yeah, we can leave that as that question. That's fine. I'm going to use the same question for the subsequent rows. So we good practice to make a collapsible section into a grid, so that you have more flexibility as to where you want to split the inside of your collapse section. Let's make this a collapsible section. We paste the same value, we'll make it toggled as well. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually reproduce the same field in each one of these sections. So let's make this into a grid. We're going to be collapsible. What platform do you use? Make it toggled. And now I'm going to copy this field here into my other toggle sections. Here we go. And I'm going to change the name of these text areas. So here we're going to have the first toggle section for the coding tools, and I'm going to change now, and I'm going to actually group these sections together. So you see you have an option within the HTML structure to add an attribute called data group. By default it is empty, but now I'm going to actually group these three toggle sections together. So I'm calling the group platform. I'm going to make the first one open by default, so that's true. And I'm going to name these sections. So these IDs are required for these collapsible rows, and this is part of the jQuery accordion plugin that requires to have a unique identifier for each of these. So these by default are being created randomly by the plugin, but obviously we can change them to something more useful. So I'm going to call this Windows, I'm going to call this one Linux, and I'm going to call this Mac, right? And instead of having a yes or no field here, I'm going to have this as actually the Windows text. And in both cases it's going to be Windows, just that one will be disabled by when it's toggled off, or highlighted in green when it's in use. Linux, and this one is going to be Mac. There we go. Okay, so let's update this. So remember, what I've basically done here is I've actually grouped these last three sections together. Okay, and next what I'm going to do is, let's look at what it looks like on the front end. Okay, so here are the toggle sections. Unfortunately, these are not being displayed properly because the toggle width by default is set by the toggle plugin, but we can change that as well. But just to see what's happening now, you see these, because they are grouped, only one of these groups can be open at a single time. So what platform do you use, Mac, Linux, or Windows? You can actually select one of these, and automatically you have to fill in the coding tools required that used for this preferred platform. So how can we improve on these little toggles here? Well, that's quite straightforward. What we're going to do now is we're going to use a custom CSS for this form, which will be loaded automatically for us by the plugin. So in order to customize our toggles, what we want to do now is we want to add specific classes to the toggle elements so that we're able to customize their styling. So to do this, these are the toggle elements where we have the data on and the data off. These are the attributes, the text attributes that will that control the label on the toggle. So in this case we have Windows, and here what we're going to do is we're going to put a Windows class for this one. Over here we are going to put a class called Linux, and down here we will have Mac, and this is going to allow us to customize each of these toggles so that we can redimension them, we can widen them to the size of the labels. So in the CSS, let's have toggle.mac. We will set the width to 60 pixels. So by default it's 50. Mac is a small word, so it probably doesn't require that much. Okay. Then we're gonna have Windows or Linux first, and the Linux is a bit longer. We need 80 pixel maybe, and then Windows we're going to make 100 pixel. Okay, updates. Now let's see what it looks like on the front end. Right. Okay, so these are now looking much better. We have the correct width for these little toggles. So one last tip with regards to this to the styling of these toggle forms. You'll notice that when we're grouping these by default, as I was explaining, these are disabled, but they don't stand out as prominently as these ones because they're being disabled. They're being slightly paled out, and therefore you can further style these a little bit more by looking at the on state. So when the toggle is on, and by the way, this is the disabled state of the toggle in general. The on one, ideally you want something a little bit more how should I say, prominent. So you could do something like font size up to 18 pixel, let's say, to increase the font size, and you make the font weights maybe to bold. This has been taken into account. Yeah, this is active, but the font size is not, and that's probably because it's being overwritten by this rule here. You see the CSF grid tries to do a minimal amount of styling for the forms, but there are a few places where I felt it was important to get a out of the box forms that look decent on most themes, but obviously to leave it entirely up to your theme to style your forms and things like the font. The font itself is coming from the theme rather than from the plugin and things like this. And there are a few places where I felt it was important, to style a little bit the forms, and this is such a case. So in this case, because my rule here gets superseded by this one here, I need to actually add a couple more classes in this one in order to make sure that it gets taken to consideration. So let's say toggle.disable, because this is when we know we want this to be highlighted. Toggle on, toggle disabled. Has that worked? Something, I must have mistyped something. Let me type it on again. Toggle on active dot toggle dot disabled, which is the parent. build with a D. Yeah, that now works. And if I put the font size, does that work? 18 pixel. Yeah, you see, so now this is actually overriding this rule here. So you have to just make sure that if you put in new rules, that, you know, the rule you're writing is actually is not being overridden by one of the rules from the plugin. So let's put the font weight to bold. Okay, so you see that looks a little bit better in terms of highlighting the fact that this is actually active rather than one of these. And when I swap these, automatically the new disable active on toggle will be highlighted as per the rule. So I can copy this rule. That I just created. Where is that? Hey. That's because I'm looking at the wrong one. Let's go back to Windows. And here we are. So I can copy this. Copy rule, and I can paste it into my CSS, my custom CSS. Okay, updates, refresh. Right. So there you go. So these are little customizations on the styling that you can do on your own forms. And I will be doing a few more of these as I go along in these tutorials. And by clicking on these, we can actually switch between each one of them. And you'll notice that the active ones are now disabled, and they're disabled on purpose because these three are grouped together. And when they are grouped together, and by default one of them is open when you load the form. So if I refresh this form, you notice that this toggle of the three is by default open, and that's simply because we've actually set it as, remember, we had this no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong form. This one here, HTML. If you remember, I had set the data open to true on the first toggle row, and that means that when this form is loaded, this toggle section, as it gets initialized, it'll be set to open by default, such that the Windows appears open. Furthermore, it is now not feasible to actually collapse it again. And this is a feature of the plugin that basically means that at least one of these sections needs to be filled in. So now we're using toggles as an optional, but nonetheless requiring one of the three to be filled in. So if I now fill in a few of these details here, and I was to try and submit this form without actually filling in this required field, the form would actually complain, saying that this field is actually required. Notice also that if I go back to the original HTML structure, notice that in this grouped toggles, so we have one here, another one here, and a third one over here, you'll notice that I'm using in each case the same field called coding tools. This is something that normally a normal form would complain about and would cause havoc trying to submit the same field 3 times. But because in this case only one such toggle is being submitted, one such field is being submitted, the plugin is able to differentiate that fact and therefore populates the coding tools for the right toggle being submitted in the backend. The other ones, if I open the Linux one, although it's the same field, it is by default disabled when it's not being selected. So if I was to use Windows, the window one would be enabled and submitted, while the other two would be disabled and not submitted into the backend. Now, if I, on the other hand, do fill in, let's say with an Atom IDE value, let's say, then now the backend is happy and it gets submitted into the backend. When you have this, when you have toggles, because toggles actually act a little bit like an input field, the fact that a user is actually selecting a toggle is actually giving you an extra little bit of information. This toggling on and off is actually also being submitted in the backend. And when you have a mail notification, you will notice that in the mail you can now actually submit toggle values. So by default, any toggle would be prefixed with CF7SG smart grid dash toggle dash the ID of the unique ID of the toggle. So if you look at the HTML, we have our first toggle, which is for languages over here, and it has a unique ID of VWHBWP. If I was to change this and say I want this to be a unique ID called languages, and I update this, and I go to my mail section, the toggle is now named languages as per the ID that I've inserted in the HTML language. Having said this, when toggles are being grouped, the toggle doesn't appear 3 times, but is now being named as CSV toggle platform, which is the name of the group of those 3 platforms. So depending on what kind of toggles you use, you can actually insert this in your mail, and this will show up showing which of the 3 toggles is being used in this case, in the grouping case. So if somebody clicks Linux, the mail would replace, the mail tag would be replaced by what platform do you use, and then separated by a pipe symbol, and then the word Linux, which is the value of the ID being the value of the toggle. Whatever value you put in the toggle, this is the value that will be submitted and replaced in this this toggle. So you have the ability also to include that kind of information in your mail. Last but not least, you noticed how the grouping of these toggles forces one of the toggles to be open by default. So when I refresh this, the Windows is open by default, because if you recall, in the HTML I put the data open attribute to true, and it forces one of these to, it forces the toggle to be open, but it also forces the plugin to automatically disable the grouped active toggle. So whichever toggle is active in the group, it's being disabled, and the user cannot actually close this, therefore forcing the user to use one of these toggles. So it's an either or situation in the way these toggles have been grouped and are being used. However, if I was to actually leave the toggles in the closed states by default, so if I update this now, and I go back to my form and I refresh this, now by default they're all closed. If I was to open one, notice that the highlight doesn't work anymore here with the CSS because it's not disabled anymore. And the reason it's not disabled anymore is simply because a user can select either of these three. Cannot use both. He can only use one of them. So it's an either, and he can actually close the ones. So he has the option to either use one of these or not to use one of them. So he can also. It's a totally optional grouping, and therefore it's a slight variation in the grouping of toggles. So I hope this little example has been useful for you to understand how you can differentiate between collapsed sections, which are a way to break up a long form, but whereby fields within a collapsed sections are submitted regardless of whether the user has used or opened the section, and regardless of whether the fields are required or not required within that section. But on the other hand, when you use toggles within toggle sections within a form, these toggle sections now become optional, and the fields within them become optional and are not being submitted if not in use. So this is really the difference between collapsed sections and toggle sections. And furthermore, you can group these toggle sections together to give you more flexibility in the way you actually want users to fill in the form and what is required or not. Right. Thank you, and see you in the next tutorial.